Okay, we're finally into the last step, which is purchasing equipment. It's a very straightforward process. You don't have very many credits to work with, so odds are really good that your path is going to award you some basics. You'll probably get some weapons and or some armor, in some cases some spell armor, and that's about it. You're just going to get the basics. And so you'll get 3,000 credits to round out your character. You're going to pick maybe a weapon you didn't get if you want something extra. So if you got a spell blade, maybe you also want a spell rifle, you could buy one of those. You could also purchase consumables, are tremendously popular, as you'll see. And of course, there are other types of equipment, which we're going to go over briefly. Things like vehicles, ships, and of course, standard comm links, all sorts of little things. What we're scrolling through right now are the weapons, and I want to show you a couple of fields that you should be aware of. Most of them are straightforward. It's very clear what they do. For damage, as an example, if you were firing through a Mark V spell rifle, you're going to do 2 damage plus whatever the spell would do. And then it's going to give you that extra point of accuracy and make it easier to hit your target. Your limit is how much mana can be pumped through it. So you have spell pool, and the most pool you can channel through this in one spell is 4. So if you have, let's say, a rank 1 firebolt, and you want to amp the magnitude up to 4, so you're going to make it really powerful, you could do that, but you can't go beyond that. So even if you yourself are capable of doing 5 or 6, the rifle is capping you at 4. You need a more powerful magic item. And then you've got the range. This is very straightforward. In our combat system, you're looking at either hexes or squares. It's going to give you 25. This is a very long-range weapon and is used to keep people at range. The ammunition can be spell, or if you've got a Mark 7, also armor piercing. So it's got two barrels effectively, and you can toggle back and forth as the user. Lots of people will use technology where it's useful and then switch over to spells to take things down, and they'll use those a little bit more judiciously because that spell pool does go quickly. It's expensive, though. You can see to get yourself a Mark 7, it's 4,500 credits, so you're going to have to find another source of money probably after character creation to get that, unless your GM is giving you more starting cash. Spellblades work exactly the same way. You will notice that they have a range attribute. If they're one-handed, it's probably a 1 range. If it's two-handed, it's probably a 2 range, which means that they can hit people from a backline to simulate using a spear or a two-handed sword. They just have slightly better range. And again, that's going to be squares or hexes depending on what your group is using. Spell staves grant you an extra point of brace, so if you are somebody with a low brace, this is a great way to counter that. A spell stave only requires 1 hand. It's usually used in 2, but oftentimes mages will use a spell stave in 1 hand and a spell buckler in the other, and then they'll just kind of grip the spell stave with both hands when they need to. So if they're going a pure defensive route, that's a good way to do it. Heavy weapons give you AoE as a default, and then that's not touching the limit, which is the important difference. So normally, if you threw let's say a spell rifle, wanted to add a 10-meter cone and had the ability to do that because the spell supported it, it would cost you a point of limit to do so. But in this case, you get it for default, and you still have the limit on top of it. So if you're using a nice spell cannon, you can really fire a powerful spell, and you're getting that default high damage in a cone without having to pay for it, really. You can see down here we've got our 2-handed weapons. They are very potent. They're expensive, but they do a lot of damage. And so if you want to roll around the battlefield chopping people's head off, while also channeling spells into them, lightning bolts or void bolts, this could be a lot of fun to do. Now we're into the defensive stuff. Almost everybody will have a suit of cavalier body armor of some sort. And it's very, very common. It's almost ubiquitous. Lots of people have access to it. It's not terribly expensive. And just give you some basic stats. You're going to get a little bit of armor and the ability to breathe for a few hours, which makes it ideal for, brief extra vehicular activity. If you're, let's say, on a spaceship and you need to go repair something, you could throw on your helmet and go out and take care of that. You can see here we've got the spell shield and its stats. Gives a little bit of armor, a little bit of resistance, but it can also be used to parry spells. This is especially useful for classes that are proficient in doing so. And then finally, we get down to the spell armor, which is one of the most popular items because it's used on the cover of the first novel. The spell armor is really powerful. It gives you great armor, a little bit of resistance to start with, and more importantly, a bonus to strength. So you've got the same atmospherically contained system. You've got subsystems like a comm unit. You've got more speed, but they are really expensive and most people can't afford this. So if your path doesn't grant it, you're probably not going to start with spell armor. The more powerful spell armor is just getting nutty, where if you're looking at this like Mark 9 as an example, 7 armor and 5 resistance. If you have a couple of normal people walk up to this and they're trying to hit it with their spell rifles, they're not going to do enough damage to really hurt that spell armor. It's just going to wipe the floor with them. It really is a huge advantage. And if you're doing melee, the armor itself is giving you 4 strength plus whatever your character has, I mean, you're just going to wreck people with melee weapons, and you are super fast. But, that's if you've got that extra million credits lying around. There is also scout and heavy versions of the spell armor. You can see their stats are a little bit different. And we've got rules coming that will standardize this, so you have a point-buy system that will allow you to kind of construct your own spell armor with kind of the strengths and weaknesses that you want it to have. The same will be true for vehicles and ships. Vehicles and ships are a little bit different than everything else in that vehicle and ship combat rules are different. They have velocity, which is different from standard combat, and they take place on a much larger scale. You'll see us use the term clicks when we get down to ships. Anyway, a quick look at some vehicles. The one that is achievable for most parties, if they want to pool some funds, they can buy a crappy roller. And it's just what it sounds like. It's got 6 wheels. It's all-terrain, but it's not very fast. It has low hit points, low defenses. It looks like crap. It's probably belonged to a dozen or maybe even 100 other owners before you. It's ancient and in bad repair, but it's what you can afford, 11,000 credits. If you've got more money to work with, you can buy an NTM roller. That's the new Texas Military, which is better stats, better speed, triple the hit points, is much, much better route to go if you can afford it. You can also see we've got hover tank stats. Hover tanks are nuts. Even the low-level ones have an incredible amount of hit points and very high brace. And they do quite a bit of damage and usually have multiple people in the crew. So they're a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, and their opponents know it, especially if they see a Mark V. Mark Vs are the highest in production currently by the Interans, and they are really, really tough. So you drop, 4 of these onto a battlefield, and it's not good for the opposing team. And then finally, you have the new Texas equivalent. So this one's entirely technological, doesn't utilize magic in any way. It's not as good as the other hover tanks because it's not Magitech, it's regular tech, but it is way cheaper. And you can buy yourself 4 hover tanks, 4 regular NTM hover tanks for the price of 1 Interan. So you could definitely outfit a mercenary crew much, much more inexpensively using hover tanks, NTM hover tanks. We did list a couple of ships. There are a lot more on the way, but this is just the initial pass, what we currently have available. The Corsair Mark 7 Spellfighter will show you kind of how Spellfighters work. Spellfighters are fast, they're nimble, they don't have great defenses, their hit points are not very high. They don't do well with brace, so if they run into an enemy ship like ramming, they're just going to get destroyed. It ends badly. But they try to avoid that, and they are very nimble, and so they are good at doing something at that 5 dodge. They do great damage, have great accuracy, have great range, and can use either their spells or missiles can be stocked on a Spellfighter as well. So it's a very potent weapon, but can be taken out easily if somebody has the ability to shoot it. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the Confederate battleship. It's got a full 1,000 hit points and 60 armor. So if you're hitting it with anything that you as a player are carrying as a weapon, like your spell rifle, you're not going to cut through the outer hull. It's just not happening. You can see for brace, it's got a 9 brace, so it's got crazy defenses for brace. But dodge, battleships aren't all that nimble. The resistance, though, is still pretty high, which means that even basic spells aren't going to do a ton to it. You need some really powerful spells. And then it's got a main cannon that you don't want to get hit by. It's doing 40 plus the spell, or based on ammunition like nuclear missiles. And it's got a really great range and a limit of 7, so you can fire big amped up disintegrates through this thing. And it's got up to 1,200 crew. This is a massive ship, and it can carry a bunch of cargo as well. Speed of 22, which is pretty good. And then finally, as long as you have a spare 550 million credits laying around, you can purchase one. For basic equipment, all we have currently are the comms. It's wise that you pick one up or have one built into your armor. You can do that without any extra cost. So you can just say, okay, I buy a pocket comm, but I don't want it as a pocket comm. It's built into my helmet, so I can see it on my HUD when I have my helmet on. That's just fine too. And then finally, just a quick note about potions and consumables. These are where lots of people save their money for because they're very powerful. Mana Beer restores spell pool. So if you keep a couple of these on hand and you run out of spells for the day, you can drink one and get 3 extra spell pool to get you kind of back in the game for a little bit. If you consume more than 3 in an hour, though, you will gain the drunk condition, which is going to give you some penalties. Healing Beer, same deal. You can definitely keep yourself on the battlefield longer drinking a few of these, and they're not terribly expensive. You get that 3,000 credits, so you can buy a fair number of these. Counterspell potions are great. They are going to give you a chance to stop enemy spell casting, and greater counterspell potions, if you can afford them, just shut down enemy spells and are super, super powerful. So those are something that also people like to stock up on. And then finally, greater healing beer and greater mana beer if you're rich. you definitely love to have that stuff, because if you've gone through a long combat and you're down, 20 spell pool out of 22, you just all gulp, gulp, gulp. Okay, now I've got 15 of it back, and I'm back in the game almost at full strength and can go for a while. So those are the consumables. That's it, guys. That's the entire equipment section. You can see sort of what we're working with. Hopefully this is useful. This is the last step of character creation, and there'll be one more video after this one, which will kind of summarize everything. Last thing before I let you go, let's take a look at the character sheet. Here we go. It looks like it was lost in the last save, so I'll have to add it here. But basically what I would do is put down his gear. So he's got interim Mark 3 spell armor. I know it sounds like the thunder of God when I'm typing. So I'm not going to fill that out because, that'll deafen all of you. But you can see this is where I would put the equipment on the new character sheet, and I would record cyberware, weapons, armor, and then any potions that he purchased and had available in the potion loaders for the spell armor. So this is where you would track that. Anyway, that's it. That's the entire equipment section. Let's jump into that summary video.